Maxed Out Man, helping you become the man you were made to be.
Hey guys, it's Kevin Davis from the Maxed Out Man podcast. I am here with Brian Anderson. I'm going to read some of his bio here. Brian's the director and foundation relations for IC Stars, whose mission is to launch careers for young adults in under-resourced and marginalized communities. He was also the co-founder and executive director of Fathering Together, which builds communities for dads to share resources and stories so they can be emotionally courageous, connected, and committed to their families. He now serves as the president of their board of directors. As a husband and father, he works continuously to educate himself to be an advocate for his children so they can find their own voice. And I should fail to mention, I am Kevin Davis, so this is the Maxed Out Man podcast. Thanks for joining us. Hey, Brian, thanks for coming on board. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, what I usually ask is just the kind of the backstory, how you got here, kind of your journey through all of this stuff. And then, I want to talk fatherhood and masculinity and raising daughters and marriage and pretty much everything else you want to talk about.
Yeah, happy to cover everything. But to answer your first question, I woke up this morning and came downstairs, and that's how I got to the podcast. And I feel like every day there's a sign, whether that's God or the universe, some sort of energy pushing me in the direction I need to go. And it's up to me to listen to that, right? It's up to me to catch the signs from my wife, my children, the expectations at work, obligations I have. But I'm truly a believer that, the doors that open on your journey are ones you should walk through. Doesn't mean they're going to be easy doors to walk through, right? There's always going to be trials and tribulations we face. But every time we slam our heads against a wall or a closed door, I think of that as a sign to say, maybe this isn't the right path. Maybe there's something else you should be following to get to the next stage of your evolution or your dreams. And that's kind of, how I got to Fathering Together. It's how I got to my current job with IC Stars. I saw the signs and I saw where there were needs that my skills could meet. And I stepped up and said, hey, I volunteer as tribute, so to speak.
Nice. And so how do those, how would you define those signs? Like for, I'm a Christian. And so I would say, hey, God kind of guiding my path and listening to him. And in my case, whether you want to call it, whatever you decide to call it, I am stubborn and usually say, hey, this is my way. So if if from my faith standpoint, hey God, if you want to come along and make sure this this goes well, that'd be great. But so how did you get led? What signs do you have? And you have two daughters, right?
Right. Yep.
Married with two daughters. I have two daughters myself. Mine are quite a bit older than yours. But how did that kind of come to fruition and what kind of signs are you describing?
Yeah, I think, there's some that say that God works in mysterious ways, and I think that's true in some cases, but God also works in very ordinary, plain ways, right? So when your wife is saying, hey, take out the trash, that's a pretty good sign you should take out the trash.
Right.
But in the same token, I was a social worker right out of college trying to, address social ills and help people out in that sort of way. And I totally burned out because I didn't have the mentor or the guidance to have a balanced life, right? I was pouring myself into work and losing my identity. And I, long story short, didn't end well. And so I was like, what should I do? Right. I was kind of praying to God and saying, what's next? This is clearly not my path. And the next day I had a meeting with someone at a university in the town where I was working. And they said, hey, we have a position open to help undergrad students volunteer in the community. You have all of these connections from your social work days. Would you be interested in this job? So that was a good sign, right? Like here I was burning out at the end of my rope, trying to figure out what's next. And God said, hey, here's this interview that you're connecting with. Let's see about this. And that led to 15 years of working in higher education, working with students and leadership development, helping them find their calling. And in that journey, my wife came along, my kids came along. And so I think the through line through all of this was community building and kind of like servant leadership and supporting others achieve their goals, right? Whether that's coaching, mentoring, what have you. And so when my daughters came along, I was happily working. I didn't envision Fathering Together as a full-time job or anything, but I needed support. I needed other dads in my life other than my own, preferably dads my age in that same journey of fatherhood with young kids. So I reached out and and started building that community. And then my friend Chris, who's the co-founder of Fathering Together, he started a Facebook group and said, hey, do you want to help me run this? And one thing led to another. And I listened to the energy. I answered emails. I said yes when opportunities popped up, and then said no if those were the wrong opportunities as soon as I could. But by saying yes to things, by paying attention to messages that were coming in, both in the ordinary humdrum ways and in those kind of miraculous ways, when Facebook said, hey, we'd love to spotlight your community in this new campaign we're doing. Would you be interested? I said yes, right? Like free advertising, marketing power of 100%. Facebook. Let's do this. Obviously there's a lot of things with Facebook that I don't agree with. There's a lot of challenges with Facebook and social media in general, but we have a community of 127,000 dads around the world, and never would I have imagined, the 20-year-old version of me, the teenage version of me who is thinking, what's my career going to be in life? This was not in my cards by any means at that stage, but I said yes along the way. I look for those signs. Yeah.
It's crazy how that happens. I just turned 51. So to look back at that early 20 self, I have 2 degrees, one in business, one in exercise physiology. And like the path I'm doing right now is not exactly the path that I had envisioned, but I can see along the way the decisions I've made, the things that I've done kind of put me in a position now to be able to serve men, and especially now at my age, I'm like, there's a lot of guys that are just not living up to what they could, whether it's in marriage or the health or their, community involvement, parenting, all of those things. So it's crazy how that path happens, but it's the hindsight is great because you can look back and see, oh yeah, these are those forks, these are those diversions. This is where I took the wrong path. This is where I took the right one. Right.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure you're the same way as all children are. Like when we're kids, we don't listen to our parents. We don't think they know what they're talking about because we're young. We know what we want. We have our passions and ambitions or whatever, and our hormones and all the other fun puberty related things. But, I often remind my daughters, my job is to help you, to keep you safe, and to create opportunities for you. Right. And not necessarily in that order. And when I tell them no, or when I say, think about this opportunity, I have a reason for it, right? Mm-hmm. And by being upfront, being transparent as much as possible with my daughters, it doesn't mean they don't have their tantrum. It doesn't mean that they still don't have their tween angst and fighting back and whatnot. But at least it's creating a rhythm to our conversations where they pause and say, maybe Dad's right on this one. Or they push back and say, no, Dad, remember, I like doing these things. That's not aligned with what I want to do right now. And, they're 7 and 10. So the level of depth to our conversations varies, right? I am developmentally appropriate in how I engage them, but I don't talk down to them. I don't treat them as newborns anymore. I really want them to have that autonomy. And I think that's something that my parents did at an early age with me that helped me, or helped role model for me, a healthier way to engage children and help them, be prepared for the mistakes in their life rather than avoid them completely. Because we're all going to have those mistakes, like you said. Yeah.
Oh yeah, 100%. I have a unique experience because I kind of grew up in a broken home and kind of started raising myself around the time that you're youngest. Around that time, I kind of, I really didn't have any adult supervision. So when I became a father, first of all, I had no idea what the hell I was doing, which I don't think any of us really do, but I didn't have any role models. And then trying to balance between, hey, I was basically a little mini adult by the time I was, 9 or 10 years old. That's probably not the appropriate path for my kids. My kids are 26 and 24 now, and 25 and 24. They're 15 months apart. And to your point, I feel like I get a little smarter every year as they realize that some of what I'm saying actually might make sense.
Yep. Well, and I think, what you were alluding to earlier, where your life isn't where you thought it would be. Obviously, technology is vastly different from when we were kids. But also, I think whether you believe in like Strength Finder and Myers-Briggs and those personality tests or not, I think we all have these inherent leanings or tendencies towards our skills and gifts. And many of us have those skills and gifts that can translate across many dimensions career-wise. And so to imagine only one path for you is doing yourself a disservice, let alone your kids. And where I work now, IC Stars, it's a 4-month training program, intensive coding and, back end web design, all that kind of stuff. Interns, basically develop an app in those 4 weeks and pitch it to an employer or client. But they all come in with like, well, I'm just going to do IT services, right? Or I'm just going to do cybersecurity, because those are the two flashy things that everybody knows about in tech. And yet by the time they graduate in 4 months, they're thinking all sorts of nuanced positions within. Some of them are like, I can't wait to not be a coder. I want to supervise their team because now I have the confidence and the leadership skills through the, running a small group. And many of them did not have those opportunities. Like yourself, they come from very different backgrounds, under-resourced. The dreams were not meant to be big. And, we get to change that for them. And with our children, we, obviously, yes, yours are quite a bit older than mine, but you probably laid those foundations because you didn't have that and you wanted to change that. You wanted to break that cycle for your daughters. And I commend you immensely. So, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Yeah. When, we kind of I'm an entrepreneur. I've worked for myself for over 25 years now. And so I always called it taking the entrepreneurial approach to life. And, we homeschooled our kids after fourth and fifth grade. And I called it the entrepreneurial approach to education, because it was like, hey, what path does the government or world or whoever tell us that we have to take? And what diversions can we make in that static path that would be better fit for us? My youngest she's not great at science and math. She was not a great quote unquote traditional student, but she excelled in language. And so we sent her to Costa Rica for a total of 6 months when she was 14 and 15 to go to an immersion school for Spanish. So she's trilingual. She speaks English, Spanish, and she's deaf in one ear, so she speaks American Sign Language. But we tried to take that path now, which, we're not sure if it was the right path, for sure, and to push her in that way. And she's a paramedic now, which means she kind of figured out how to study and all that. But to your point, with some of these kids that you're talking about, she's been thinking about doing medical school, and she's kind of on this pre-med path. And I asked her the question, have you spoken to any actual doctors about what it's like to be a physician in today's, crazy, terrible healthcare system?
Yes.
Because I said, this is your choice. This is your path. But have you explored that? Have you actually talked to physicians that do this for a living? And I would guess in your case, you're like, hey, do you want to go do Control-Alt-Delete and reboot people's computers all day in a corporate environment? Do you want to? How do you like small dark closets that will be your office? Right.
Totally. Yeah. Well, and I think that's I have multiple masters because why not? I worked at a university and got free classes, right? I took advantage of it, but I'm definitely a doer, right? Like my dad's a carpenter. My sister, while she has her PhD in building construction design, she designs and builds and flips houses. And I just come from industrial stock, right? Like I don't have those skills to build anything, but I can repair things just fine, or I can grab the tool my dad needs, or call him from Home Depot when I'm in a bind, right? So, but I'm crafty. I'm always doing. My daughter loves to just be with me. And I ask her, well, what do you want to do? She's like, I just want to sit and read, or I just want to sit next to you, right? She just wants to be around me. And
quality
it's a great
time,
lesson.
Right.
Right. Yeah. And I love it. And for all of us dads out there, we don't do enough of it. But I tell her, like, I don't be very well. That's not something I'm always wanting to tinker. I'm always wanting to do. And when I do just be, quote unquote, I need to be alone. Like that's my meditative, prayerful moments what I do at night. So that's something I'm working on, right? Like that's something I don't want her to learn, like dad can't be present, right? When I was writing my book, one of the dads I spoke to said he always had to perform to receive love from his father. Like at home, he never heard, how was your day? It was always, did you excel at this math test? Or did you make the team? Or did you do whatever? And so he learned he had to step up, right? He always had to be actively engaging in something. And that's, tragic for him. Like he broke down in our interview because he didn't want his children to have to perform. He just wanted them to know they were loved. And I think that's a lot of what our generation comes into fatherhood with, and what we're kind of deconditioning ourselves to do in the ways that we can, right? We all have our different skills or whatnot, experiences, but whether that is, ultimately learning it in the classroom like we did with our degrees, or pursuing a more vocational trades type route, I think, the higher ed's in a tailspin. Like the work I do now with IC Stars is very like tactile and focused and solving a problem like we do in the workforce, rather than theoretically understand something and then take a test. Right. And so I think we all, like, the world is too diverse to have only one pathway, but the more we can highlight that all pathways can lead to success if done correctly, the better, right? Especially as dads. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's having that freedom to be able to say, look, this is, college isn't for everybody. This path may make sense for you. This path may not make sense for you. Back in our day, it was literally like, where are you going to college? Not are you going to college? Right. Like it was, there really didn't seem to be a societal choice. And I think now with, all the student loan ridiculousness and all the other wacky things that are going on at the higher, quote unquote, higher ed, that's not necessarily the right path for everybody. We're heavily involved in the trades just because of some of the things. We're in the automotive industry with one of our businesses, and know a lot of welders and painters and all of that. So we tend to be more trades, and I'm a blue collar guy by nature.
Sure.
Kind of like you were saying, but I go down that road. I'm curious. You made a statement about your daughters and kind of, that state of being and really understanding not to be so achievement based. How do you balance between, and, forgive this analogy, between like, I don't want my daughters living in my basement at 27, but I also want them to pick a path that works well for them. Like how does that balance work in your own life?
Yeah. Well, I think, achievement oriented, we need to make sure that our children know, and I do this with my daughters, that achievement does not equal financial success, right? Like you can achieve at building a puzzle or figuring out a Lego build, right? At 7, those are high goals. Great. You can achieve in the classroom by making friends, by doing well in school, listening to teachers, right? So how do we break down what success looks like and achievement? Yet also making sure that they know that there are expectations, right? So we were just talking this weekend. My daughters don't clean their rooms very well. I'll be honest, I'll be open about it. We have a messy house sometimes, but we love to entertain, and we have friends over on the weekends occasionally, right? And so we don't want people walking into squalor. And so I think it's setting the expectations early on with children to say, here's what is expected of us in life, to just maintain cleanliness, healthiness, a balance, right? Like both that mental health of resiliency and knowing like I'm worthy of love and attention and friendship, but also that I'm worthy of also a clean space, because studies show when you have a clean desk, a clean area, you can be more focused. There's less stress when there's not piles of junk everywhere. And so early on, it's setting those stages. And then with my 10-year-old, she just turned 10. We were having some conversations like, okay, you're double digits now. I'm not going to keep making your breakfast. I'm not going to keep cutting your food or whatever, right? I'm starting to give her a sense of autonomy and ownership of what she's allowed to do and what she can do, including walking to school. Like this morning, she goes in early for this math club that she's a part of. She knows that we trust her with that. And with that trust comes responsibility and everything. But it's a baby step towards one day, babysitting or driving or whatever. So it's setting up the achievements early that they are achievable. Sorry to be redundant there, but that there's easy wins for them, but also that they know we have their back, right? That the falling from failure is not going to be bottoming out, bankruptcy at 7. It's just going to be, I skinned my knee, and here's dad with a Band-Aid. And then next time it's, I broke my arm because I tried to, ride my bike without holding the handlebars. Maybe that was a bad decision, right? And so I'm not going to mend her broken arm. I'll take her to a doctor, obviously. But, there's steps to get there. And I'll conclude that thought with my uncle. When I was getting married, I was talking with my uncle. He's 30, 40 years older than me, and one of my nieces or another relative had a baby that was just running around like crazy and climbing on things, and I was like tense and freaking out, and he was just like, no big deal, like ignoring it. And I was like, how can you let your granddaughter just do that without freaking out? And he's like, because one, I trust my daughter to care for her child, and because I know that someday she's going to be driving, and that stunt she's doing there is an easy win for her to fail on and not get hurt, right? And those the risk levels start to escalate, but they don't go from crawling to driving, an F1 car. It's incremental, and for kids that means they fall in increments, but also as parents, then our stress level rises in increments. We don't have to worry, unless, I mean, obviously if you're adopting or other situations aside, right? But as you're raising a child, their risk level goes up with your tolerance level, is what my uncle was getting at. And so translating that to achievement as well is, how do we get their risk level to grow in a way that is a manageable risk and easy wins for the developmental stage that they're in.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like obviously with your multiple degrees and your experience, it sounds like you're probably super deliberate about each stage, and or you try, at least you try to be, right? And I'm curious, to your point, we had a situation this last weekend at church, right? It's the Advent season right before Christmas and all that kind of stuff. So they do the children's nativity, right? Like the children's nativity. Yeah. And there was a particular kid that, for whatever reason, and this shows my old crankiness, but for whatever reason, the parents allowed this kid to be in a 6-foot tall dragon suit, like one of the blow up dragon suits, which completely took away from, in my opinion, the entire production, right? Like, it's because it was, hey, look at me type behavior. Right.
You mean your Bible doesn't have a dragon in it?
My Bible was missing the dragon.
They must have. Hey, you got an edited version, man. You got.
Which, I mean, too, and honestly, it wasn't even like the diversion from the nativity story, which obviously I think is super actually important. I'm not to be legalistic about it, but there's kind of this story in the Bible, and this is the way that happened. And when you edit it to whatever your own needs and desires are, then it gets a little wacky. But it seemed like that these parents had gone off of the, kind of on the other side of the continuum. Like, this is probably not a great empathetic choice to allow my kid to want to be the center of attention and to literally make him the center of attention.
Right. Yeah.
How do dads balance that? Because you were kind of walking down, and I think we're still here, this whole gentle parenting. John Christ has a great bit about his sister, the kid's having a complete tantrum because he broke a crayon in Chili's, and he tells this joke like, I just want to offer this as a service. If I ever see your kids acting like this, I will beat your kids for you. which is, off the other end of the continuum.
Right.
I'm curious, like, where are we as a society of parents of these younger kids? Because my kids are older, right? We miss this whole thing. I know there's a huge long-winded question, but I just want to get your sense, because I don't live in this world.
Yeah.
I'm kind of outside looking in.
Well, yeah, you were kind of at the height of the helicopter parent movement. Yeah. And I think for me and where I sit and having, managed this Facebook community and continue to talk with dads all the time, I think we're too diverse to have one movement anymore. I think there are so many resources, and, my book among them, that took me a while to write, because I was like, do I even want to add another bit to the chaos of everything? Right. But I think the easiest way to answer that is, there's so many choices. It's up to every dad to research and figure it out. I say in my book, I say it everywhere, like, you can read every book on fatherhood and parenthood, but ultimately the manual you need is the one you co-create with your child. And so I think for me, it's not so much labeling as helicopter or gentle or whatnot. It's more, how are you building a unique, special relationship with another person? And with our partners, it's, finding someone who we want to spend the rest of our life with, that will put up with all of our flaws, but also rejoice in our successes. And with our children, it's very similar, where, they come into this world reliant on absolutely everything. And, 1 week into my child's life, my wife was, needing to get out of the house, right? She was born a week ago. So middle of a winter of Chicago, and we were holed up in our house, and my wife was like, I'm going stir crazy. I just need to go to Target. I just need to go somewhere for an hour just to stretch and not be thinking about motherhood. And so she fed the baby and left. And, we were breastfeeding, and we were trying not to do formula yet. And of course, my daughter decides I'm hungry right after my wife leaves. And I'm like, are you serious? And so I texted my wife. I was like, hey, don't come back right away, but just so you know, this is happening. I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to be the dad here. But I felt so worthless because all I could do was offer her a hug, right? I could do skin to skin. I could swaddle her, whatever, but I couldn't feed her. And so as a man, I realized, what is the one thing I can provide as a dad and a human being is attention and care, if I can't provide food. And so that's what I kind of made that choice right then and there. I'm going to be attentive as much as I can. I will stay a step as much as I can ahead of the developmental curve for her. But also listen to her when she says, this is what I want, or this is what I don't want. And push a little bit, right? When she wanted to quit gymnastics, we didn't say sure right away. Yeah. We let her, struggle a little bit. And same with soccer. She was, she got hit really hard with a soccer ball in the head, which is, everybody freaks out with head injuries, but she was gun shy for a solid 2 games. She would just be on the edge of the action or just avoid doing whatever, but she would stay on the field. And one day I just kind of said, what's going on? Come on, you're better than this, right? I kind of gave her some tough love, and she just broke down crying. And I was like, shit, I pushed too hard. But she was like, I'm afraid, Dad. And I was like, okay, all right, I'll let you be afraid right now, right? Let's talk to Mom, who is coaching. Let's have Mom pull you for this game, right? And then something happened, right? Some friends of hers pushed her to think about it differently. And this season, holy cow, you can't keep her away from the ball. She's got assist after assist. She scored all these different things. But if I wasn't attentive to that, right? If I wasn't gentle when I needed to be gentle, but pushing just enough when I needed to, right? Then who knows where we would be. And so I think ultimately, to get back to your very complex question, and trying not to step on any political landmines, I think the route is.
We don't care at Maxed Out Man podcast. Just say whatever you want.
No,
as long as it doesn't hurt your particular brand.
No, it's all good. But I think, kind of going back to Jesus and Buddha and all these other, religious traditions that say there's a middle way, right? There's a common balancing way that we all need to find. In the Tao Te Ching, there's a chapter that talks about it's best to be like water that flows and moves when it must, but moves around when it has to. And so as parents, how do we act like water? How do we, respond, but push gently? And those gentle pushes, right? Unless it's a flash flood, water doesn't change the earth rapidly. It slowly moves a river where it needs to be moved. And so how do we as parents slowly move around our children and push them in the direction that we see their skills leaning, but also stepping back and just, as hard as it is, be present when all they want us is to just sit there and read a book next to them while they read a book, or grab the Lego brick because they're building it, but they don't know where the one brick is that they need to find, which happens more often than not in my house. So you can't see it, but just over there is just piles of Legos. So,
oh man, there's probably $1,000 worth of Legos if there's a pile, right? Legos.
Oh yeah. Well, I saved all of mine. I was that guy that saved all my Legos. So we're just expanding on and who knows what Santa's going to bring for Christmas, but nice. We're going to have a lot more Legos in our house.
I wish I had all the Legos that I had at one time. You go look at some of these sets and you're like $300 for a set of actual Legos. This is crazy. I mean, there's some cool designs and stuff like that they do, but to your point, it seems like that we in the Western culture, at least, we're not very good at balance.
No, yeah.
in what you're describing, right? It seems like with each generation, we get almost out of balance, the direct opposite end of the continuum from the previous generation. Like if we were a generation that were too hard on our kids, my generation, then my kids' generation then are too soft. Like they literally just let their kids do whatever they want, which is not appropriate in most areas of life. Like if you want to exist in society, you can't just run around screaming in the middle of a crowd, right? That's trying to pay attention to something. How does that look in today's, like, how do we teach fathers, especially because fathers tend to, fill that different kind of role and tend to be in a more leadership type role, just from in I guess kind of the generic terms. Sure. But how do we teach dads how not to be on one side of that continuum or another?
That's a really loaded question, and I'll try to be succinct because I've been doing men and masculinities work for 20 years, long before I did fatherhood work, because they are slightly different, right? But so I'll answer it in two different ways. From a societal standpoint, we have these messages that are still seen in Mad Men, right? With that revival, there's a show out now called Lessons in Chemistry that's all about the 50s and the science culture and the sexism there, and but we also see it in politics and all sorts of areas where this idea that men are absolute leaders, that they can be alphas and have no consequences. There's societal support for that, for better, for worse. And growing up, like I was taught, I'm the firstborn son. I can do what I want. I've got the skills. I can do whatever. My parents told that to me and to my sister, but society at large was also reinforcing things that my parents didn't want reinforced. And so when you get to become a dad, you're like, okay, well now I have to step back, right? My life is no longer my own. It's for my children. Yet for the first 20, 30 years of my life, I was the alpha. I was the end of my story, right? The main character. And now I'm going to be the side character and maybe even a cardboard character in the background at some point. And so I think from the societal point of view, there's larger systems at play that we need to be confronting. We need to be able to say it's not weird when there are women leaders in the workplace. It's not right. And it's not, and there's nothing wrong with, equity and allowing opportunities for women and others to rise to the top, because it's not an issue of men losing power or losing opportunity, even though a lot of people will like to spin it that way. For me, I spin it as we get to gain other opportunities, right? Like there's a network, a national organization called the National At-Home Dad Network. They've got several thousand members. They meet every year. Most of these are men that chose to be the primary parent at home. Right. And their wives are doctors, their wives are anything, right? But they had a great career or they had a skill set that they wanted to pursue. And the guys that I know in that network were like, great, I actually kind of want to be a dad. I want to stay at home. I have this innate desire to make the lunches in the morning and see them off to school. And so to, on the societal level, expand those narratives of what dads can be for their families is an opportunity that I think we should lean into. And that doesn't make you less of a man. It doesn't mean that you still aren't buff and strong and could go bench lift a car if you wanted to. Yeah. It just means that you're tapping into that feminine energy and wanting to be a caring parent, not just this tough guy or this business suit. Mm-hmm. On the personal level, then that means doing some of that deep work ahead of having children. When I interviewed dads for the book, I asked all of them, when did you know you wanted to be a parent? And what steps did you do to prepare once your wife or your partner said, we're going to have a baby? And 99% of them said, I read some books, or I went to a doctor's appointment. Maybe, I like this one guy made a pros and cons list of all the things that were going to change. But only like one or two people said, I went on a personal retreat, or I went and got therapy, or I did some mental health preparation ahead of being a dad. Because as you know,
or if you're like most of us, it's like, what'd you do to prepare? Well, I had sex with my wife.
Right. Yeah. Right.
That was about as much preparation as I have.
Or I built the crib, right? Like I did the handy,
I
I
put
did
the crib
the
together, right? Yeah.
the tough guy stuff, right? And none of those things are wrong, right? Especially not the sex part. That's a lot of fun. But the deeper part, right? That innate, like, who am I? Who am I to my children? Those questions that you may never have asked yourself, those aren't the questions you ask at 2 a.m. when your kid is screaming for a bottle and you're exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the questions you ask before the baby arrives, because that will give you the time to process and think, right? And so as men, having the awareness, having the opportunities to step into communities, to ask other men really tough questions, to find that support is critical. But also then having other men hold you accountable to what you want to be as a man and as a father, husband, what have you, and finding that right community of pushers and supporters, because I was very lucky to find those on my street. When we moved in, it was all a bunch of empty nesters. We were kind of the first young family to move on to my block. And now, like, it's completely, turned over. Our kids all walk to school together. It's very Leave It to Beaver kind of like 1950s, like everybody's much more diverse than the 1950s, but it's this great little like street of friends for my kids. But not everyone has that. And so do you find it virtually? Do you find it at your church, your workplace, maybe the gym, wherever you need to, right? But with Fathering Together, that's what we've tried to build. And that was really getting back to one of your earlier questions. That's what drove Fathering Together, is how do we find communities for dads to find that support and accountability where they can be vulnerable without feeling ashamed or judged. And then ultimately, as they get ready, how do we work towards equity? How do we create opportunities for all of our children to thrive, no matter how they identify or what they want to do in their lives? And have those support systems, both virtually, especially during the pandemic. And now that we're mostly out of the pandemic, let's hope, knock on wood, we have in-person groups across the country where dads get together and learn how to do diapers together or go to movies together, both by themselves and have a dad night, but also with their kids. We do school-based programs where this one school a couple towns over, they meet monthly as dads, and then once a semester they do a project for the school. They did a paper airplane Dads and Donuts fun day with their kids last fall, had over 100 people show up for it. Last spring, they did a clean the gardens and the playground, and kind of did some like end of year maintenance as just volunteers, right? As a way to get more engaged, to show that schools are not just for moms and children, right? Dads have a role to play in the schools, and here's one avenue that this community of dads is doing it. So yeah, I think that's as best as I know how to answer that question.
No, I mean, I think that's a great answer. And, a couple of things I picked up on. First of all, I like the fact that with the thing that you just described at the schools, that it isn't, I think so many times that we try to turn dads into pseudo moms. Right. Like, and I think that's great that they're doing more, and I don't want to say man things, but I think that are typically more man interests, masculine interests, because I think one of the problems that we are seeing now is it's really hard. I think it's hard to be a masculine dad, and to be okay with like, okay, I can show up for my kids. I can be vulnerable. I can say, I'm sorry. I can, like with me, I said, I'm sorry all the time. These are my failures. This is how I screwed up. Let's move on. How I hurt you, all those things. But then also to be a masculine, more traditional masculine guy that fixes things. When my daughter was like 18 months old, I had her underneath a hot rod, changing the oil with me, and, sort of more of those. And if that's not your leanings as a dad, then that's totally okay.
Yeah, sure.
But I think we're kind of, and again, it's like that's where we have a hard time balancing that continuum, right? Like I could be like you, and I liked your point. You can be a stay-at-home dad and still like working out and fitness and working on cars and all of these things. Right. It doesn't mean that being a stay-at-home dad doesn't mean that you're a stay-at-home mom. That's substitute.
A guy. Yeah. Right. Well, and just the same as like moms that stay at home are not just, homemakers like we think of in the traditional, like stereotypical term. They're doing 9,000 things to make the home run efficiently. They're volunteering in their community, doing all these things. Right. And so why can't dads do those? And we just have a different angle, a different, skill set that we bring. And I think, I started doing Men and Masculinity's work a few years or really probably more like a decade before toxic masculinity became a term.
Mm-hmm.
And all of us in the space cringed when that came out because we knew how everyone was going to interpret that. And, and we've seen it play out in terrible ways. And most of us that are in this line of work around healthy masculinity and balance, human life, existence, what have you, I've heard two things. I've heard confined masculinity and incomplete masculinity. Confined meaning that we're only allowed a certain level of emotional expression. We're only allowed a certain range of skills and jobs. Incomplete in the same sense, right? Like I am incomplete if I can't draw, because that's one way that I journal or meditate or whatever, right? I'm incomplete if I can't cook because I love cooking and my wife doesn't. And so I'm in charge of the kitchen, whether that's grocery shopping, cooking, cleaning, whatever. She does laundry. That's her thing. I always screw it up. I've definitely ruined some clothes of ours because, whatever. And so we've kind of made that balance in our home that kitchen is mine, laundry is hers, right? Fine, great. That doesn't make me less of a man. There's some amazing chefs out there that are men and women, right? And
which ironically, that whole women belong in the kitchen thing makes no sense when you look at it, because professional chefs are like 80% men or more.
Yeah. And there's other reasons for that too, right? But
100%.
But I think, but to your point, like men are not mom substitutes. We are men. We are fathers. We have something to contribute, and that doesn't mean we have to be feminine in our energy. It just means we have to be whole. We have to know that it's okay to cry, and it's okay to go to the ballet on one day with our daughters and then watch football with them the next day and say there's nothing wrong with either thing. Both are highly competitive, extremely athletic endeavors. Like if you've ever met a ballerina, like they're corded muscle, right?
Oh,
like,
dude, yeah.
Holy cow! Like they could probably take on a footballer on a sprint or something, right? So to put one thing above the other is doing a disservice to our kids, because that's telling them this is something you cannot do because I disdain that, versus pointing out to all these other opportunities that we do approve of, right? And I say this in a vacuum of this call, and obviously every father and every couple has to make those decisions on their own, whether you're together or not, and all this stuff. But I think the one piece of advice that my father-in-law gave me when we told him we were having kids, I was like, any advice, just kind of like joking, because we were good friends, but we're much better friends now. We're still getting to know each other back then. And he's like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, we're still, whatever. She's like, all I can tell you is expose her to every opportunity you can think of. Like, that's all you need to do as a dad, is just expose your kids to do cool things. And even when those things are mind numbing and grating on your conscience, like going to a Taylor Swift concert, or
I took my girls to Taylor Swift,
and
back in the day.
I love her message. We listen to her all the time, but after the fifth hour, you kind of want to change the radio, right? So no shade on Taylor Swift. I love Taylor Swift. If you're listening, please don't hate me.
If you're listening, Taylor, if you're listening, please share this out to your network. No.
Yes, that too. Kevin Davis and Brian Anderson are really cool people.
That's right.
But anything, right? Like, I mean, we would have Disney songs on randomly repeating day in and day out when they were super little, right? Or
they were the Wiggles. So
Wiggles, sure, yeah. We had Tickle Me Elmo playing forever, right? Elmo's World or whatever. Like, all those are great things in moderation. So, how do you expose your kids though, right? Like, how do you not do too much screen time? If you are doing screen time, how do you make it educational, not just YouTube and just mind numbing stuff, right? And to be fair, the level of intelligent kids programming now compared to our childhood is like leaps and bounds too, right? There's lots of great opportunities to have your screen not be a parent, but just a tool and a resource for education. So so anyway, long story short, I think I don't even know what your question was. Taylor Swift distracted me.
That's okay. That's all right. I think that answered that part of the question.
Sure.
Going back to some of what you were saying about women's roles, and I've talked about it on the podcast before, but my wife was a stay-at-home mom. Our kids both graduated from high school, quote unquote, when they were 17 and left the house. So we became empty nesters. And then she started building Jeeps, racing off-road, welding, all of these crazy things that are, and so I got to be deeply engrossed into the all female side of the trade industry.
Nice. Yeah.
And I would recommend that if you have any chance to be exposed to these women, go do that, because it will make you realize that men aren't as vulgar as you think they are until you get to be around a lot of tradeswomen. Because some of the things that were said, and a lot of times I was the only guy around. So, which was funny, because I became the guy that kind of, swept the floors and all those things. But all that to say that I think that when we define women's traditional roles versus men's traditional roles, we think of welders as men, but in reality, women make better welders in a lot of cases, especially with TIG welding, because it's a two-handed. It's a two-handed activity. But yeah, exposing your kids to all that stuff, I think is awesome. I think my girls learned that you can kind of do anything. I was an entrepreneur. I do some real estate, and we do some, and I had to renovate a house. So I took she was probably 24 at the time, took her down to this house and had her learn how to frame and do drywall and all these things.
Nice. Yeah.
Not knowing that she was going to buy a 125-year-old house a couple of years later. And so now she sends me these texts and these videos like, hey, Dad, I just renovated my bathroom. And then she's asking me questions here and there. But yeah, so like really exposing them to all of that stuff. Whether or not it's something you enjoy or not is super important, for sure.
Yeah. Well, and that's where like the community also can come in, because, I grew up with some close family friends, and their dads were not like me, or well, they're not like me, but they're not like my dad. And so they gave me another role model of fatherhood to look at and explore and ask questions when I didn't feel comfortable asking my dad a question. Or in the case of my current situation, our next door neighbor, he does coding and tech development, and I don't. He's also a really great guitarist. And so in the pandemic, he would just sit in his backyard and have concerts for his kids. Cool. And, so all of the rest of us that shared property lines, we all just played in the backyard in our respective spaces. And of course, all the kids were like, well, I want to play that. Right. And so he taught them how to make like cheap little, like, a string and a chord kind of like play guitars or whatever. And I can't do those things for my kids. I can teach them a whole bunch of other stuff, but it was great. Right. And he doesn't know how to garden. He doesn't know how to cook. And so his daughter's constantly asking me questions when I'm in my backyard cleaning and prepping things. And so in a way, like, it's not just you and your wife. It's you, your wife, and all the other adults around your children that are helping educate. And so you can be intentional there too. Like how, as best you can, how can you incorporate really positive people in your life around you, not just for your own health and well-being, but also for that next generation and our children. And I was joking, my cousin just had a baby. And so I went and, brought her food and was meeting the baby and everything. And she was like, oh, I can't wait to do this and this and this. And I was like, yeah, that all sounds great, but just wait and see what your child does, right? And her childhood best friend just had a baby. So she's so excited that her child will be best friends with her friend's child. And I'm like, well, when they go to school, it's going to be a whole new ball game, because you're going to meet other parents. And now you can't just make a couple's friend. You've got to make a couple's friends and kids that your kids are going to want to hang out with, right?
Which is super complicated.
Complicated. Yes. But if it all works out, or if partially works out, then great, because now, you can have friends over and have an adult conversation while your kids distract each other, rather than, pestering you the whole time or asking you questions and interrupting you. So, but to your point, like exposing your kids, getting them to shadow you where they can. And if they are developing skills that you have no clue how to address, finding somebody else to help with that, or again, with your wife, like, let her take the lead on something that you don't know how to do. My wife's a physical therapist, and we have anatomical models in our house of female anatomy, because she does a lot of postpartum health with women and helping them reclaim their bodies and all of that after childbirth. And so we've never used slang. We've always used appropriate things. And my kids don't have vulgar mouths, but they're just very explicit about things that I'm like, okay, this is an in the house word, or we don't need to be talking about this in places where people don't know us, because they're going to look at us funny. Right. Yeah. So, setting those expectations again.
Right. Yeah. And I love the idea of the community. I've got some friends that their son is super into cars, and they love cars, but they don't have really any automotive knowledge. And
Sure.
so, and they haven't taken me up on this, but they're in Florida. I'm like, fly that kid up here for a week. I'll teach him how to rebuild an engine, or I'll at least, show him the inner workings of an engine. I've got multiple engines here in my shop, just for fun. And so that gives me an opportunity, to feed into other kids and to expose them to something that, whether it's because of interest or skill set or finances or whatever, they may not have the opportunity to teach their kids.
Right.
And there may not, I think that one-on-one time is even better than, going to a community event or whatever, which those are great. But I think having that to be able to feed into each other's kids, and great opportunity for you living in a neighborhood like that has that camaraderie and faceted network of dads and moms and all that. That's got to be so cool.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't know it, right? You don't really know everything when you buy a house, but it was close to our schools that we wanted. It was close to different things. And, our neighbor across the street, she's an elderly woman that has kids, but no grandkids. And so every time we're outside, she's saying hi.
Grandma neighborhood.
Yeah, she's bringing over treats and things. And I shovel her driveway, right? Because, it helps her out in the winter months or whatever, right? It's part of that village, right? It's the communities that we need to survive, because that's how, as a species, we've grown and adapted over the years, right? Like, we need to lean on each other. And there was one other thing that you mentioned that's eluding me now, about community, but if it comes back, it'll come back. So
okay,
never mind. Yeah.
I do want to be respectful of your time, but I want
Sure.
to ask you one particular thing about raising daughters
Sure.
in kind of this modern man thing. Like when my kids were coming up, when we were kind of getting to the almost basically the ages you are, we did, the daddy daughter dance. And when we did that, I made sure, to like come to the door, quote unquote, and all of this thing. And I've always treated my wife, I always open her door for her. I open the car door for her, and the more quote unquote, chivalrous
Sure.
ways of treating her. And my girls have said in the past, hey, thanks for showing me what a good model is of how you could treat your wife.
Yeah.
How do you teach your girls about masculinity and be, kind of being in these male-female relationships and those kind of things? Ironically, my one daughter married a woman. So my different energy. Different energy. All of those, didn't really totally apply, but they actually do apply in a lot of cases. But I'm curious how you are teaching your daughters as they navigate that. Like, there's that old joke: if you pull up in front of my house to pick up my daughter and honk, you better be delivering something, because you sure as hell are not picking something up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those kind of things.
Yeah. Well, on that note, so when we were getting the Dads with Daughters Facebook community up, people would post sometimes like, oh, I bought a gun because I have a daughter, protect, all that kind of stuff. And by no means am I saying we shouldn't be protectors, but there's an inherent violence towards somebody else in those jokes. And I definitely, we would take those posts down and say like, no, we're here to uplift people, not like if you raise your daughter correctly, she's not going to want to date someone that you need a gun around, right? Like, that just seems so old fashioned to me. Right. So, but on the other side, like, I don't want her dating someone who's just going to honk and wait outside for her either. Right. Like, And so I love that you are chivalrous. I love that you are kind of role modeling that behavior, not just to your wife. Right. Like, and I think that's the piece too, where I do those things for my wife for sure, but I also let her do those for me sometimes, because, sometimes I'm sick or I need help with something. Right. Whatever. It's just being a good human, but also, I do that for other people, right? How am I showing up in the world as a member of the world, not a leader of the world, right? Like somebody who can give and take at the same time. And I think that's where I never say like, this is what a man is, because that's too essentialist in a way. That sounded elitist, but that's too specific for my daughters to even comprehend. But they know I'm a man. They know I'm a father and a dad and all those titles. And so the actions that I do around that, making sure the house is clean, making sure that they have what they need to get to school, remembering important things like their best friend's name. It's amazing how many dads I talk to that don't know the best friend or the best friend's name. Right.
Wow,
and that's a disservice to your child, because that's telling them you don't care enough to know the details. Now, do I remember every kid's name? Hell no. But I remember their top 3 friends, right?
Yeah.
And I asked, like, hey, do you want to play with them this weekend? Or, hey, what's going on with this person and their family? To show that as a man, I care about things, humans, and not just the bottom line or some archaic breadwinner kind of ideology, whatever you want to call it. But I think the other piece is, not being explicit, but in the book, I modeled the book off of servant leadership, which is a corporate term that Robert Greenleaf back in the 60s created, basically saying, like, I'm the CEO, but if I don't treat my staff correctly, they're not going to work very well. And that means my shareholders are going to be pissed because we didn't make a profit. So how do I serve my staff the way I want them to be treated so that they grow and flourish in my business rather than leave and go to a competitor? And as I would talk to dads, I realized that's what fatherhood is, right? I don't want my kids seeing another dad or another person as better than me or an alternative to me that is going to one-up me in some way. I'm jealous enough, I have a bit of an ego enough to not want that to happen.
Right.
But also then, how do I make sure that they build the resilience and the right choices in their life so when they do meet a partner later on, man, woman, whatever, that they are finding the values in those people that we hold as a family, that they're finding people that are complementary rather than, rebelling and eloping and I never see them again. My youngest, I will never see again because she's one of those just independent, like, if I hear from her once a year after she turns 18, I'll be happy.
Don't let her read Vagabond. In other words, that book,
right.
Vagabond, right?
Right. Or On the Road or any of these like soul searching, endeavors. Yes. Chances are she'll be the next Taylor Swift, given her penchant for stand-up comedy and music and everything
Nice.
else, which will be great, whatever. But whereas my oldest is ready to move across the street and never get too far away. So those will probably change. But how am I in my manhood, in my day-to-day living of my values, illustrating what a good man is to my children, to my partner, whomever, but most importantly to myself, right? We spend the most times with ourselves. And so am I going to bed every night confident that I did everything I could for my family, for my coworkers, for myself? Did I spend time in prayer? Did I spend time exercising? Did I get a little bit of video games in just to get that itch of nerdiness out, right? And that childhood boy that played video games as a kid, right? Like, how am I doing that for myself? But then also, is the kitchen clean? Is everything put away? Do we have meals prepped for the next day? Whatever, your family does for those kind of day-to-days. And if I can say yes to as many of those things as possible, then it's a good day. And for me, I know I don't get enough sleep. So that's the one thing that is a bad thing. So we can talk offline about all the things I'm doing wrong around that, but from your health perspective, but by being that good person, quote unquote, I'm showing my daughters what a good man is in my opinion. And, it's misattributed all the time, but there's a quote like, speak the gospel, use words if necessary. And that's definitely something that I learned early and apply as often as I can, because actions are far louder than words, especially when our kids are little. And so, just trying to live up to that every day.
And they're watching, right?
They absorb everything and watch everything, even when we don't think, or when we don't think they're listening, they'll bring up something that we don't even remember saying, and they were 3 towns over and somehow heard it, right? So
my daughter is deaf in one ear, but she could literally hear, and she was an eavesdropper, so she would literally hear everything that ever was said in the house. And then she'd be upset about something. I'm like, well, you're the one that's sneaking in on my conversation. If you want to be part of the conversation, come into the room.
Right. Or explain more about that, Dad. What do you mean by that? And it's like, you're not an adult yet. You're not going to understand. Let it go. Right. Yeah. Well, and I think too, to your point, like you've just shared 2 critical things, like one of your child is deaf in an ear, another is lesbian. Like, all of us have these things in our families that no one knows necessarily, right? And so for us just to walk into a room and assume, well, this guy is a bodybuilder, he must have all these other attributes. That's a ladder of inference that's going to lead to bad things for everybody, right? Like, we're all so diverse in our makeup and our backgrounds. We have so many different things in our backgrounds that to walk into a room and assume everything about a person based on a few bits of information is just a disservice. And so I think that's another piece of this manhood thing for our children, is to show, like, don't jump to conclusions, assess the situation before you make any big rash decisions. And if you are going to make a rash decision, at least breathe a couple seconds before you hit go, so that, some level of consciousness gets in there to say, is this really the right thing to be doing? So,
Yeah, at least have some knowledge that you are making a rash decision, and there could be
Right.
bad consequences, there could be good consequences, which is fine. I think that's great. I think that's a great place to finish up. I want
Sure,
to tell me, we've mentioned the book multiple times,
Sure,
which is awesome. Tell me about the book, how to find the book, how to find more information about you, and kind of the things that you're doing. We found you on LinkedIn, so tell me what you got.
This is the book, Fathering Together, same as the organization I founded, because it just seemed right. So much of the organization is built into that book. As I said, it's looking at how to live a connected dad life through the values of servant leadership that we see in the world. Because again, many of us are taught to be professionals first and dads second. And so if that's the case, how do we use those professional skills back in the home, right? We're all team managers. We all use communication in the office. Why can't we just use those at home? So basically just lifting up those kind of like tried and true methods of the workplace and applying them into the home with family. Find it at Amazon, find it on our website, fatheringtogether.org. That's where you can find our organization, where you can tap into our virtual communities, step up and be a leader in your own community to lead a school program, or, get involved with a city group that we have involved in our network. My personal website is this connected dad. Wow. Nope. Just kidding. My website is The Connected Dad Life. And theconnecteddad.life. Sorry, clarify that. I definitely work one-on-one with dads. One of my degrees is in ministry, so I do spiritual direction and guidance in that way rather than like kind of traditional coaching. So basically, how do we use our relationship with God as a template for the relationship we want with others in our lives? And so I have a couple clients I work with every month on that, and just helping, find that balance with people. But fatheringtogether.org, Fathering Together is all of our handles on all the different things. And it's been a wild ride. Appreciate you having me, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks for coming on board. I'll put all those links, of course, and I'll put
thank you.
probably an affiliate link to your book for Amazon, and we'll have all that out there too. So, hey, Brian, thank you so much for joining me, man. I appreciate you, and I appreciate what you're doing for dads in the world. That's awesome.
Well, thank you for letting me share a bit of my story and for getting words out there too, expanding these definitions and experiences. Love it, man. Right. Thanks,
man.
If you're looking to really maximize your life and become the man you were made to be, head over to maxedoutman.com and get your journey started today.